صلاتي ونسكي ومحياي ومماتي لله رب العالمين إن صلاتي ونسكي ومحياي ومماتي لله رب العالمين.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Ibadah from head to toe, worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from head to toe with every different parts of our bodies, how to fulfill this purpose of our life in a practical way, in a truthful way, so that the religion of Islam is not just some meanings or words or something that is in one part or the other, or one time not the other, but to have our whole entire life the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us. This is how the companions radiallahu anhum, they pleased Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was pleased with them as a result of this understanding of the religion of Islam. They didn't separate by one act or the other, or one state that they were in or the other. Islam was the way of life that they lived, with all what they said, with all their actions that they did, and all the different things, whether it's done by the hearts or the tongue or the different parts of our bodies. And we talked about the conditions for the deed to be accepted. We talked about pillars of ibadah with the perfect love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and perfect submission. And one last thing to be mentioned before we talk about the acts of worship done by our bodies from head to toe is that we need to have 3 acts of worship. And again, we can go into details with this when it comes to the deeds done by the heart, but it's very important. It's the foundation. 3 things very important briefly that we need to have in our lives for us to establish the acts of worship in the proper way. And these 3 acts of worship, the people of knowledge, they gave the example of it as a bird. A bird has a head and 2 wings. The head basically resembles the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala again. The love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Without the head, the bird does not exist, does not have any life. The same thing, without the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the deeds has no life to it. We have to have the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we talked about that briefly in the past 2 episodes. And the 2 wings, one wing is the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the other wing is the hope for the rewards from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, al-khawf wal-raja. The bird would fly with the 2 wings, the fear and the hope. This is how we continue with our life to live and to do the acts of worship with the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and hoping for Allah's reward. The love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we talked about that briefly. And this is something that we need to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for, and we need to do certain acts of worship, the obligations, the recommended acts, and to be patient in doing these acts of worship so that the person would have the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our hearts. And one of the very beautiful ways to establish that in our life is to make dua, is to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be present in our hearts. This is something that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam used to say in his dua, Allahumma inni as'aluka hubbak wa hubba man yuhibbuk wa hubba kulla amalin yuqarribuni ila hubbik. And this is an authentic dua from the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He would say, oh Allah, I ask you for your love, for the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that, and for the love of those who love you, loving the Prophet ﷺ, loving the companions radiallahu anhum, and to love the people of knowledge, loving those who love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because this is a sign that a person loves Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is that the believers would love the believers. The more the person is closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he is loved by the believers. That's why we love the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, we love the companions radiallahu anhum, we love the people of knowledge and so on. And also to love, asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to love any deed that would get the person to be among those who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with, those who are close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to make us love the deeds that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with, so that it's not done just by forcing ourselves, by doing it with the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the hope for the rewards from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, something that doesn't leave our life whatsoever. When a person desires are overtaken the person, and is about to commit a sin or being in state of forgetfulness, he remembers the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Remembers that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most powerful subhanahu wa ta'ala. That when He ordered the believers to do something or forbade them from something, this was such a serious thing. It's not for play, because He's the most wise subhanahu wa ta'ala. And He's the one that is capable of all things. So as a result of that, it brings the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hearts, so that it would keep the person on the straight path. As the ulama, they say the fear or the khawf, the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's like a whip on one's back that keeps the person steadfast. It's an act of worship that the believers won't have it in Jannah. When they enter paradise, when they enter Jannah in the Day of Judgment, this fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the fear, won't be there anymore. But the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be in them. So the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to keep us on track and to keep us being steadfast till we reach our final destination in peace. And at the same time, we seek hope, or we are hoping for the rewards from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone in any act that we do. This would keep us also steadfast on the straight path, hoping for the rewards from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Al-Raja. Al-Raja, or hoping for the rewards from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's not a negative act. It's not something that comes under the category of wishful thinking, right? It's not wishing for what is good without doing anything. No, comes with positive action, that you would do the deed, and you would do it according to the way the Prophet ﷺ, and you're doing it sincerely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you are hoping and seeking the rewards from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, with the good expectations that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will accept your deed. This is not the wishful thinking that many people would do when a person would say, I would love to enter Jannah, but then without taking the means, without the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's like someone sitting at home and expecting that food would comes and flies in the air for him to eat, or when a person would want to have children, for example, without being married, and so on and so forth. It doesn't work this way. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created means, and He also made means for people to enter the Jannah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Day of Judgment, to be saved from the hellfire. These means are to be known from the Quran and the way of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. So now we have the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the hope for Allah's reward. I'm not sure if you remember all the things that we mentioned before. The introduction is getting longer here, but this is the last thing, inshallah ta'ala, before we get into the physical acts to be done and how to do them for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But this is such a very important introduction that we need it for the rest of our life. So let's review it quickly, right? And then we give a scheme of what's all the different acts of worship to be done with the different parts of the body. And then we start that, inshallah ta'ala, next episode. 2 conditions for the deed to be accepted, and I hope that you would memorize that by now. 2 conditions for the deed to be accepted: the deed to be sincerely done for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, according to the way of the Prophet ﷺ. These are the 2 conditions. For the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, according to the way of the Prophet ﷺ. The purpose of our life is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. What are the 5 rulings that all our life can be referred to the 5 rulings? What is wajib or mandatory? What is haram, what is forbidden for us to do? What is recommended for us to do? And there is no sin if a person doesn't do it, but we do it for the sake of Allah. What is disliked or makruh? To stay away from it, but if a person falls in it, it's not a sin. And what is mubah, or what is permissible. And this is something that we would see in the different acts of worship. The pillars of worship, 2 pillars. When it's a pillar, meaning that there's no worship without the pillars. The perfect love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we do the acts of worship for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. And we need to establish that in our life, and we talked about that. And the second pillar is the perfect submission. Perfect submission, without hesitation. When we talk about different acts of worship, it's not going to be, but my life is this way, but my environment is that way. This is not valid for us to say. It is enough for us to know that this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to do, perfect submission. And don't worry, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that would make ways out for you. He would make it easy for you, as He promised subhanahu wa ta'ala. So 2 conditions, 2 pillars: perfect love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the perfect submission, and then the example of the bird, acts of worship that we need to carry with us at all times. The love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is basically our life, is about that, and the two wings, the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and hoping for Allah's reward. What are the different things with our bodies? We have our head, and we have forehead, we have eyes, we have ears, we have mouth, we have tongue. All these things, certain acts of worship that we need to do with our heads, right? And then we have our arms, we have our legs, we have our stomach, right? We have our private parts, we have different things in our bodies. How can we use them for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how can we stay away from what displeases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? This is basically the subject of what's coming ahead. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among those who learn and implement what they learn according to the way of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
قل إن صلاتي ونسكي ومحياي ومماتي لله رب العالمين قل إن صلاتي